Chapter 1. The world beneath the iron sky, beneath the screaming winds of a red and hollow sky. A world of flame and metal was born. Its name was Mandalore. Not in peace, not in silence, but in smoke and iron and wrath. The land was not made to sustain softness. It cracked with hunger. Its deserts scorched even the bones of beasts. Lightning fell sideways. Storms spoke in tongues. The air shimmered with ancient heat, and beneath it, something terrible stirred not evil, but inevitability. From this broken soil rose the first of them, not Mandalorians, yet not warriors yet, but survivors. Nomads wrapped in armor forged from scavenged ruin. They did not worship gods, only victory. They did not dream, only remembered. Every clan that emerged from the dust carved its name into the wind with blade and fire. There were no kings, no Jedi, no Sith, only the lawless breath of those who endured. And endurance became scripture. The iron sky, ever watching, became their roof of prayerless faith. Its storms did not forgive. Its stars did not guide. It was the vault of death, itself unmoving, uncaring, eternal, and yet the clans thrived beneath it, by war, by trial, by the scream of blades clashing under burning moons. They drank the blood of myth without knowing the taste. Even before Mandalore had a name, its people were already legend, already lost. They tamed mythic beasts that could not be tamed, beasts whose skulls could crush tanks in a later age, mythosaurs, titans of the forgotten deep. They hunted them not for food, but for proof that they belonged on a world that wanted them dead. The skulls became sigils, the victories became stories, the stories became lies. But lies, when spoken in blood, become truth. In time, the clans shaped themselves by armor, not cloth, not flesh, armor, Beskar, iron, blessed by fire, able to defy blasters and even the swing of a Jedi's blade. They wrapped themselves in it, not for protection, but identity. The armor was their memory, their face, their oath. A warrior was not born. A warrior was built, and once the armor sealed, it was never removed. To do so was death, not by blade, but by soul. No one remembers the first war. It was too early, too many tribes, too many names lost to fire. But the wars came nonetheless, again and again, like moons orbiting pain. Clan fought clan, not out of hatred, but duty. The Mandalorians, though they did not yet carry that name, believed in strength above all. Peace was a lie told by those too weak to hold a weapon. And then the first voice rose, the first to claim a title greater than clan. He was not king. He was not savior. He was Mandalore. The name itself meant sole ruler in the old tongue, but it came to mean more. It meant judgment. It meant war. It meant unity carved from conquest. No image of him remains, no holocron, no corpse. Only the mask, the helm of Mandalore, a relic that would pass down through blood and ruin, always carried, never questioned. Mandalore the first bound the clans to creed. Not law, not love, creed. The Resalaner, the 6 actions, to speak Mandoa, to raise your children as warriors, to wear your armor always, to fight when called, to defend clan, to honor the Mandala. It was not philosophy, it was survival, sanctified by myth, and myth, when fed by violence, becomes prophecy, but prophecy cuts in both directions. What Mandalore the first united, time would shatter again, always again. Unity was not the way, war was. Even as they conquered planet after planet in the Outer Rim, even as they burned their creed into the walls of enemy fortresses, they knew peace was a delay, not an end. The stars watched in silence as Mandalore reached out with fire. The first crusades began not for land, not for riches, but for the thrill of opposition. And opposition, in time, found them. For in the darkness, beyond known space, the Jedi began to stir. But this, child of shadow, is not their tale yet. This is the age before Jedi fire, before Republic walls, before Darksaber and Empire and extinction. This is the first chapter, the beginning of forgetting, the forging of a people not in light, but in shadow sacred, not because they were holy, but because they endured what should have killed them. A people who would be hated, exiled, buried, and still crawl from the dust with armor intact. The clans do not sleep. Even now, echoing across time, they whisper through Beskar and battle scars. Their name is not one of mercy. It never was. It is the name given by flame and made holy through fire. They are not a people. They are a warning, and though sky no longer burns red, and its storms have grown silent, something beneath the ash still breathes. A breath held for millennia, waiting to rise again, waiting to fight again, waiting to remember the first myth of the world beneath the iron sky. Chapter 2. The Myth of Mandalore. The first, his name was not his own. It was a title, a crown, without jewels, forged in silence and blood. Mandalore the first, the one who stood not above the clans but in their fire. His armor bore no markings, no colors, no house. Only iron, only purpose. His voice was not loud, but final, and when he spoke, the war stopped not out of peace, but to listen. Before him, the clans were chaos incarnatools, without a moon, drawn only to the scent of battle. Each clan held its own truth, its own code, its own flag. Unity was heresy, diplomacy, weakness. They warred to remember who they were. They warred to forget what they had become. And then came the mask. The mask was not sacred yet. It was bone white and smooth, without eye or mouth only, the hollow space where a face once lived. Some say it was carved from the skull of a mythosaur. Others say it was molded from Beskar in the heart of a dying star. But whatever it was not of this world. When he wore it, Mandalore the First became something else, more than warrior, more than leader. He became symbol, and symbols cannot die. He spoke of a future forged, not by endless clan feuds, but by a single banner held, high soaked in dust and war. He offered the clans not peace, but legacy, not surrender, but honor. His path was not gentle. He did not unite through words. He fought them all, one by one. And when he defeated a clan, he offered them a choice: kneel or be forgotten. Most knelt not because they feared him, but because they saw something reflected in his mask. A shape in the dark, a future that had teeth. He did not seek empire. He did not build cities. His was not the conquest of territory, but of identity. He gave the warriors their first true creed, the Rizolaner, the 6 actions, not rules, but oaths carved into soul, to speak the tongue of Mandalore, so none would forget who they were, to raise the young in armor, so memory would not die, to wear their helmets always, so ego would not corrupt them, to fight when called, so fear would never rot them, to defend one's clan, so blood would remain sacred, and to obey the Mandalore not blindly, but with honor. For the Mandalore was not ruler, he was mirror. The resilient air was not a lit, was a curse, for to abandon it was to abandon being. There was no mercy for apostates, no redemption for the unhappy. The Mandalorian was born, but even as the clans found strength in unity, whispers grew in the edges of their fire. Some called him tyrant, others called him prophet. Some said he was not a man at all, but a creature of the storm, summoned from the iron sky to test them. There were those who believed he had no face beneath the mask-only shadow and will. He never removed it, not in war, not in solitude, not in death. The mask passed on clan to clan, warlord to warlord, but it never fit quite the same, for only one had worn it first, and the echo of his voice lingered in its breathless metal. His reign did not last forever. Nothing on Mandalore does, but his fall was not betrayal, not defeat. He vanished, as if the mask had claimed him back. Some say he walks still, unseen, a ghost in iron watching every bearer of the title. Others say he sleeps beneath Mandalore's crust, beneath stone blackened by centuries, beneath rivers of slag and buried cities, waiting, listening, and still. The title remains, Mandalore. It has passed from tyrants to heroes, from zealots to saviors, but none have matched the shadow of the first. For he was not myth-made man. He was man-made myth, and in becoming myth, he infected the blood of an entire culture. He gave them not peace, not unity. He gave them something far worse. He gave them memory. A memory that no fire, no empire, no Jedi crusade could erase, because it was not written in books. It was not etched into holocrons. It was sung in the low growl of dying warriors, in the names carved into Beskar, in the moments before battle, when the wind sounds just like the howl of a mythosaur, long dead. Even now, his mask may wait buried beneath ruins lost to time, or perhaps shattered into dust, spread across the stars like ash. But the mask was never the myth. The mask was only the beginning, and those who claim his name claim his curse. For to become Mandalore is to invite challenge, to wear the myth is to bleed beneath it. Every Mandalore after him carried the same weight, the expectation of unity, the fear of weakness, and the burden of remembrance. None were spared. Not even those who tried to rule with peace, not even those who loved. But love is another story, another chapter, for now. The clans ride in the wake of his echo. They do not know where he walked, only that he did. They do not know what he wanted, only what he became. And beneath the red moons, the mask still glows in dream and nightmare burning, like a forge that never cools. The myth was born, and with it, the doom of all who would inherit it. Chapter 3. The Crusades of the Outer Night the clans had tasted. Unity, but not peace. Unity was only the pause between hungers. What Mandalore the First had forged in fire was not an end, but an opening a breach through which older instincts could crawl. There were still enemies, still galaxies unburned, still names unsung in the tongue of Mandalore. The mask had brought them together, yes, but for what? To wait, to build. No, that was not the way. And so they marched, not in silence, not in shame. They marched with their boots cracking the bones of ancient dirt. Their ships fell from the sky like fangs, devouring light. The Crusades had begun. They did not call them that, not at first. In their language, they were Duracium Candace, the eternal war, a holy rite of fire, blood, and steel. a cleansing of the galaxy, one blade at a time. Mandalorian warbands poured from the rim, not seeking territory, but proving something older than speech, that strength was the only language the void understood. They were not conquerors, they were tests, and worlds that failed the test were left in ruin. It began with distant colonies, scattered moons, peaceful outposts, nameless civilizations lit by soft suns. They never stood a chance. The man came with iron in their bones and sacred fury in their hearts. They fought not for hatred, not for greed. They fought because war was worship, battle was scripture. Every drop of blood spilled upon foreign soil was a prayer sent to the iron sky. Soon word spread, not just of the attacks, but of the warriors themselves. Unrelenting, unbreaking, faceless, they did not retreat, they did not fear, they died. With their helmets on, eyes never seen, breath never broken. They came in clans, in fleets, in silence. They came in names that no outsider could speak. Clan Ordo, Clan Vizsla, Clan Cries, Clan Saxon. Names that echoed down the centuries like ghost-fire. Each clan held their own way. Some favored precision, some worshipped destruction, but all served the same myth, that Mandalorians were forged to test the galaxy's worth, and most were found unworthy. But the galaxy began to notice, not just traders and settlers and farmers, but protectors, monks of light, knights of the Force, the Jedi. The Jedi did not intervene. Not yet. They watched, they studied, they debated. What were these warriors who held no force, but defied it with metal? What were these people who knew no fear, who cloaked themselves in myth but fought like beasts? The Jedi, in their white temples and golden speech, saw in the Mandalorians something ancient, something wrong, something too close to a mirror. But the Mandalorians did not care for their concern. They did not see the Jedi as threat. Not yet. The Crusades continued. Worlds burned. Moons fell. The stars grew darker in the outer rim, lit only by the red of cannon fire. And the Mandalorians, ever sacred in their silence, began to sing. Not in joy, not in celebration, but in memory. For every battle, a song. For every fallen brother, a whisper. Their language was not written. It was etched into armor, into scars, into breath. They were not just warriors. They were remembrance given form. The Crusades became known, and with knowledge came fear. The Republic stirred in its sleep. Senators cried warnings. Worlds begged for aid. But the Jedi, still untouched by the fire, waited. They believed the Mandalorians were finite, that their hunger would run dry. But the Mandalorians had no hunger, only purpose. They did not conquer for themselves. They destroyed to remind the galaxy that weakness was sin, that comfort was illusion, that peace without power was rot. And then they touched a world that mattered, not to them. To the Republic, it was a jewel world, peaceful, bright, a library of civilizations. The Mandalorians did not burn it all, only enough to send a message: we have arrived, and we do not ask. The Jedi met in silent halls. They debated with clenched teeth. Some feared another war, some hungered for it. One voice among many spoke with clarity: the Mandalorians are not evil, but they are wrong, and wrongness must be met with light. That voice would echo for centuries, but it would not stop what came next. For the Crusades were not over, they had barely begun. The Mandalorians now believed themselves chosen, not by gods, not by prophecy, but by fate. They had survived the iron sky. They had united under the mask. They had spread their creed across the stars. And now, they turned their eyes to the keepers of peace. To the Jedi, they began preparing not for slaughter, but for challenge. They built weapons designed not for planets, but for Jedi minds. They studied lightsabers, found them lacking. They studied the Force, found it wanting. They crafted Beskar to resist it, armor to withstand it, techniques to bypass it. They became shadows in the corners of prophecy, the unblessed, the unspoken, the blasphemous, and in their forges they whispered a dream. If we can defeat the Jedi, we can defeat fate itself. But fate is not stone, it is not fire, it is not Bskar. Fate is the Force, and the Force was beginning to awaken. It stirred in temples, in visions, in the dreams of Padawans, in the silence of the council. Something was coming, something terrible. Not the Mandalorians themselves, but what their fire would awaken, what they would unleash. The Crusades were not the end. They were the key, and even now, beneath forgotten stars, the ashes of those conquests still whisper, not in words, in armor left buried, in children born of both bloodlines, in old blades passed down through trembling, hands in Force echoes that will never fully fade. They were not evil, they were not wrong, they were only what the galaxy had forgotten to fear. Chapter 4. The shadow of the dark Suburthrum, the silence of ash and ruin. There came a shape unlike any before, not a flame, not a mask, but a blade, black as the void between stars, alive not with light, but with weight, heavy, cold, hungering. The Darksaber, born not from a Mandalorian forge, but from the very temple of the Jedi. Its wielder was Tari Vizsla, first of his kind, first Mandalorian ever to be taken into the Jedi Order. He was a paradox warrior and mystic, creed-bound and Force-touched. The Jedi did not understand him, the Mandalorians did not trust him, and he did not care. In his hand, the Force did. Not, sing it growled. He shaped it not into peace, but power. And from that contradiction, the Darksaber was born, forged in secret, forged in silence, forged with purpose the Jedi feared to name. Its blade was no ordinary light, not blue, not green, not red, but pure darkness of flat edge that swallowed illumination and echoed with a hum like thunder trapped in bone. It responded to strength, not rank, not lineage, not wisdom. It responded only to the will of its wielder, and Tari wielded it with purpose. He did not keep it hidden. He did not lock it in a temple. He carried it home to Mandalore. The clans beheld it with awe, with suspicion, with longing, for here was a Mandalorian who had walked among the Jedi and returned not as convert but conqueror. His blade sang with the memory of war, and the people gathered, not for him, but for what he represented, the union of fire and prophecy, of war and myth, of creed and Force. Tari Vizsla united the clans once more, not with mask or speech, but with the Darksaber held high. The black light burned through tradition and rewrote it. Where the mask had symbolized the first unification, the blade became a second crown. It was not just a weapon. It was the M-A-N-D single quotes A-L-O-R. But Tari died, as all mortals must. And when he passed, the Darksaber did not return to the clans. The Jedi, uneasy even in his death, sealed it away in their temple. They feared it, not for what it was but for what it meant. The Force is balance, and the Darksaber was imbalance forged into shape. A rift made solid. The Mandalorians came for it. They did not ask. They did not beg. They came with fire. They stormed the temple not for vengeance, but for memory. They tore through walls of light and shields of words. And when they found the darksaber, they did not speak. They only took it. From that moment, the blade became cursed. It passed from hand to hand, clan to clan, never freely, always through combat. Through death, through challenge. It could not be gifted. It could not be stolen. It had to be earned in blood, and so it cursed them. The clans who held it ruled. The clans who sought it bled. It became the eye of every storm, the heart of every war, and with each new bearer, the blade seemed to grow darker, heavier, more hungry. It did not serve. It chose. Viz. La. Saxon, cries names that would rise and fall beneath its weight. Families broken, legacies rewritten. For the darksaber was not a path to unity. It was a mirror of Mandalore, itself beautiful in myth, terrible in truth. Even now, its song lingers in halls long buried. Even now, it calls to those who crave rule. But to wield it is to invite destiny. To hold it is to hold every failure, every betrayal, every hope of a people too proud to kneel and too broken to rise. It is not a Jedi weapon. It is not a Sith relic. It is a wound shaped like a blade, and wherever it has gone, blood has followed, but the worst bearer had not yet come. The one who would twist its meaning beyond recognition. The one who would hold it not for legacy, but for domination. A hand not born of creed or prophecy, but of crimson horns and Sith rage. He waits still in the shadows of the timeline. His hand not yet raised, but the blade already hums for him, and the clans do not know. They have already begun to kneel. Chapter 5. The civil wars without end. What begins in unity always ends in fracture. This is the truth of the Mandalorians. Their strength is not in peace, but in the struggle itself. And when no enemies remained beyond their borders, they turned their blades inward, clan against clan, blood against blood. In the echo of Tari Vizsla's myth, a new age was born not of conquest, but of chaos. The darksaber, heavy with history, passed from warlord to warlord, each claiming to be the Mandalore. Each demanded allegiance, but offered only fire. Those who held it were challenged. Those who lost it were forgotten. 1,000 battles were fought for the right to rule, but none could hold the clans for long. The blade was a crown, but it was also a curse. The civil wars began not one, but many. Each war bled into the next, without end, without silence. Cities became ash. Fortresses crumbled beneath orbital fire. Children were raised in bunkers. The stars above Mandalore bore witness to a people devouring themselves with sacred pride. Clans, once united by creed, now worshipped power in isolation. Clan Vizsla hoarded the darksaber like a relic. Clan Cries sought peace, but bled to defend it. Clan Saxon whispered of empire. Clan Wren carved art into war. And in the spaces between, lesser houses rose and fell like waves in a storm. The warriors forgot why they fought. They only remembered how some among them fewer with each cycle, began to dream of peace. They were called traitors, apostates. They wore no helmets. They built domes of glass and culture. They named themselves the new Mandalorians, and they turned from the ancient ways. They outlawed armor, outlawed weapons, outlawed war, but the war was already inside them. These pacifists were led by a noble voice, one who believed could be more than myth and blood. Satine cries, young, defiant, dignified. Her voice did not command by fear, but by vision. She sought not to erase the past, but to bury it beneath gardens and treaties. She rose to power not with flame, but with silence. And for a moment, Mandalore grew quiet. The domes of Sundari glistened under sunlight instead of orbital bombardment. Children learned poetry instead of rifles. The clans scattered to the moons, exiled by law and left to fester. But the past does not die on Malin, Dallow. It sharpens deep beneath the domes, beneath the sands and stone. The old ways waited. Like bones beneath polished floors, they whispered through cracked Beskar and old songs. The Death Watcher, secret brotherhood of the old creed had never disappeared. They had only hidden, waiting for Satine's dream to crumble, waiting to make war sacred again. They watched as the domes grew, as peace bloomed, as the people forgot how to hold a blade. And they whispered, "This is not the way." The mask of Mandalore gathered dust in forgotten shrines. The Darksaber slept, in vaults of distrust, but neither were gone, only waiting. And in the stillness between wars, something darker took notice, beyond Mandalore, beyond the clans. In shadows cast by dying stars, a figure stirred, one with no clan, no creed, no honor, only hunger, but he was not yet ready. The civil wars continued, even as Satine tried to hold her people together with hope. The moons roared in anger. Concord Dawn became a crucible. The protectors fought as exiles, half loyal, half lost. Mandalore fought in secret and foreign worlds, in bounty hunts, in whispers. The creed was broken, but the instinct remained. Children were raised not as warriors but as dreamers, yet dreams born in war cannot escape their roots. Even Satine, in her chamber of glass, knew that the walls would not hold forever, and among the Jedi one watched her closely. Obi-Wan Kenobi, he walked her halls not as conqueror but as guest, not as enforcer but as friend. Some say more, others say less. But the Force records all things, and even it held its breath when they stood alone. Love, unspoken, is still felt, even by those who wear the robe, even by those who wear the crown. But love could not save Mandalore, and neither could peace, for Deathwatch would not stay silent. They found allies, they found weapons, they found purpose. They trained in secret, recruited from the shadows, reclaimed the name of true Mandalorians, and in their hearts the old chant returned. We are born of war. We are the fire that does not die. This is the way. The next war would not be civil. It would be sacrificial. And though Satine held the throne, someone else was already reaching for it. Someone who did not believe in clans, someone who believed only in power, and would burn again. Chapter 6. Satine and the ghosts of Warshi wore no armor, yet ruled a warrior world. She carried no blade, yet held power with words. Satine cries, the Duchess of Mandalore, stood alone in the eye of a storm her ancestors had. Summoned long ago, her voice, soft yet unyielding, echoed across a people who had forgotten what silence meant. And the silence she gave them was not peace but pause, a breath held too long, a wound covered, not healed. She believed in the future. But Mandalore had never been a world of tomorrows. It was a world of scars. In the domed capital of Sundari, steel kissed sunlight through curved transparisteel. Walkways echoed with diplomats' shoes instead of warriors' boots. Art bloomed on polished walls. The songs of war had been buried. beneath classical instruments and the rustle of silk, yet beneath every marble corridor, Beskar waited, buried, bitter. The clans had not vanished, only retreated, some exiled to the moons, where the old code lived in secret. Others disappeared into galactic wars as mercenaries, bounty hunters, soldiers of fortune. They left Mandalore behind, but carried it in blood, and Satine, alone upon her throne, held back the tide with poise and diplomacy. Her court was a fragile alliance of reformists and pragmatists, of dreamers and politicians. Many doubted her, some despised her, but none could match her resolve. She ruled not with fear, but with memory. She had seen the blood herself. As a child, she fled civil war. Jedi protected her, but even in their presence, she saw villages burn. She had seen the price of Mandalorian pride and vowed to end it, and yet, that pride still burned behind her, like a star refusing to die. One name lingered in every whisper of rebellion Deathwatch. They were the shadow of Mandalore's past, reborn in secret. They wore the armor, they spoke the words. They called Satine a heretic, a usurper, a traitor to the creed. From Concordia, the moon once thought quiet, they trained in secret, plotting her end. Their leader was Pre Vizsla, bearer of the Darksaber, charismatic, ruthless, loyal to a Mandalore that no longer existed, except in blood-soaked dreams. He believed in honor through domination, in unity through war. Satine believed in peace through trust. They were fire and water. And Mandalore, always thirsty for flame, began to shift. But Deathwatch was patient, and patient enemies are the most dangerous. The cracks in Satine's vision deepened when the galaxy itself began to fracture. The Clone Wars arrived, not with invasion, but with influence. Republic ambassadors came, seeking Mandalore's allegiance. Separatists sent envoys with whispers and coin. Both sides courted her, but Satine refused. She would not let Mandalore be dragged into another galactic war. But neutrality is not peace. It is isolation. Enemies circled, allies turned cautious, resources thinned, trade was strained. And within her own world, Deathwatch fanned flames of dissent, bombings, protests, assassination attempts. Satine stood firm, never wavering. Wearing armor, she had one protector she trusted beyond all others. Obi-Wan Kenobi. He had once saved her life as a young Jedi, during the height of Mandalore's civil chaos. And though he followed the Jedi code, though they never spoke, what both felt there was a bond deeper than duty. In quiet moments, their eyes held stories neither dared tell. But duty called him away, and Deathwatch moved in. With cunning and timing sharpened by years in hiding, Pre Vizsla struck. He allied with a darkness the galaxy had long forgotten. A figure born of vengeance and flame, a man once slain by a Jedi's blade. A being more ghost than warrior. Darth Maul. He had crawled from death's maw, reborn by hatred, and wandered the stars, seeking purpose. And on the broken bones of Mandalore, he found it. Maul needed power. Deathwatch needed fear. Together, they wove a plot as ancient as war. They orchestrated chaos, hired criminals to terrorize the people, manufactured destruction, famine, and crisis. And when hope was nearly extinguished, they rescued the people they had tormented. Deathwatch returned as saviors. Vizsla stood before the frightened masses as a true Mandalorian, and behind him, in silence, stood Maul. Satine was captured. The throne was taken. The Darksaber gleamed once more. But Maul, ever cunning, did not stay in. The shadows he slew pre-Vizsla in ritual combat, claimed the Darksaber by right, and for the first time in centuries, a non-Mandalorian ruled Mandalore, a Sith. Hidden in red flesh and black armor, sat upon the throne once held by a dreamer. The people watched in silence, some in awe, others in terror, but none could deny that ancient law, victory crowns the victor. Satine, broken but defiant, was thrown into the dungeons beneath the palace she once ruled, and Mandalore burned again from the shadows. The creed whispered its judgment. This is the way. The Jedi would come. The Republic would see. The spark of war would catch once more. But Satine's voice, even in chains, echoed beyond steel and fire. She had once dreamed of peace. But was not ready, it never had been, and now vengeance wore the mask of Mala. Chapter 7. The Darksaber's shadow over Sundari. The throne was silent now, not broken conquered. The Darksaber, ancient and absolute, rested once again in the hand of one who had taken it not with honor, but with hate. The chamber beneath Sundari's glass-domed sky no longer shone with the dream of peace. It pulsed with the presence of something ancient, something wrong. Not Mandalorian, not Jedi, not even Sith in the truest sense. Something born of fire and ruin. A shadow without a name, only a face. Maul. He did not belong. Yet by the creed he ruled. When he slew pre-Vizsla, he had followed the old way. He fought. He won. The black blade was his. The clans knelt not because they loved him, but because they had no choice. Mandalore had always bent the knee to the victor, never the just. In their silence, Maul heard approval, but in their eyes he saw fear, and fear would do. He did not wish to rule Mandalore for its people. He sought no empire of Beskar and banners. He wanted only vengeance, against Sidious, against Obi-Wan, against the Jedi, against the Republic, against everything. Mandalore was the knife he would hold to the galaxy's throat. Its armies, its symbol, its pain, he would twist them into a weapon to cut the heart of the Force itself. He did not rule alone. His brother, Savage Opress, stood at his side, towering, brutal, loyal, and behind them, the remnants of Death Watch. Now fractured, some refused to follow a non-Mandalorian and fled to the shadows. Others, like Bo-Katan Kryze, sister to Satine, swore rebellion rather than kneel to a monster. But many remained, enough to crush any resistance, enough to keep the throne bloodstained. Satine was kept alive, her presence a mockery. Maul would visit her in the cells, not to interrogate, but to gloat. Her silence was more painful than screams. In her calm eyes, Maul saw everything he had lost: order, light, and the possibility of peace. He hated her not because she was strong, but because she reminded him of what strength could be. He sensed what she did not say, that Kenobi would come, and so he prepared, and so he waited, and from the void, the Jedi did arrive. Obi-Wan came not, with an army, but Alon disguised as a bounty hunter, slipping through the steel arteries of Sundari like a breath of wind before the storm. He knew it was a trap. He knew Maul wanted him there, but he came anyway, not as a Jedi, as a man. For Satine, their reunion was brief, a flicker of warmth in a frozen dungeon. And then Maul came, blade in hand, eyes glowing like twin furnaces. There were no speeches, only choice, only cruelty. Maul did not kill Obi-Wan. He killed Satine. He impaled her before the Jedi's eyes. A single motion, a single breath, and with it a future was murdered. Satine fell into Obi-Wan's arms, whispering her last words through blood and pain. I always loved you, and then she was gone, not in battle, not in honor, but as a message. Maul had taken everything from Obi-Wan, but he was not satisfied. The people watched from afar, their hearts torn between silence and rage. The darksaber gleamed above the city like a second sun, but its light brought no warmth, only the long shadow of power taken by hate. Bo-Katan moved swiftly. In secret, she rallied the dissenters, those who still believed Mandalore must belong to Mandalorians, not monsters. They struck from the dark corners of the city, one battle at a time. She did not fight for her sister's dream. She fought for Mandalore's right to choose its future, but the galaxy had grown too loud for civil war to go unnoticed. And on Coruscant, a decision was made. The Republic would intervene, not for Maul, not for Mandalore, but because the world held strategic value, and so, as clones prepped for deployment, as Jedi strategized invasions, as Bo-Katan sharpened her rebellion, and as Maul raised new banners soaked in old blood, stood once more upon the blade's edge, Sundari became a city of ghosts. Beneath its domes, old warriors whispered of the Mandalore, who was not one of them. Children were taught to kneel before the darksaber, but their hearts were full of questions. Markets reopened, but silence ruled the streets. The drums of war had returned, but no one danced to their rhythm. Maul sat upon the throne, but it was not a seat of power. It was a tomb for Satine, for Pre Vizsla, for Mandalore's soul, and above it all, the darksaber glowed with a fire that did not belong to Mandalore, a fire older than the clans, a fire forged in hate, and still beneath the ashes something stirred, not hope, not yet, but memory. The Mandalorian people had always risen from ruin. They had no gods, only ancestors, no saints, only warriors, and in the shadow of the darksaber, they remembered not just who ruled them, but who they truly were. The blade had been claimed, but the war was far from over. Chapter 8. The Siege that shattered the creed. They came from the stars like fire in the night. Republic warships, sleek and merciless, broke through Mandalore skies with the precision of judgment. Their cannons did not announce invasion, they declared fate. Below, Sundari trembled, as it had so many times before, its shining dome now a brittle promise on the verge of collapse. In the streets, children watched the clouds weep thunder. In the alleys, the old whispered, "It begins again." This was not the first siege of Mandalore, but it would be the one that unmade the creed. Bo-Katan. Cries stood at the heart of the storm. Her armor, crimson and grey, was stained not with ceremony but with the dust of rebellion. She had made a deal she swore she never would. She had called for Jedi aid. It was not pride that broke her, it was necessity. For though Maul had claimed the darksaber, he had never claimed Mandalore, not truly. He had ruled from a throne built on fear and blood, but not honor, not tradition, not choice, the Republic answered, but not the Council. Only one Jedi had listened on, not as a Jedi, Ahsoka Tano. No longer Padawan, no longer soldier, but something freer, something deeper. Returned to Mandalore, not for war, but for justice. Not to save the world, but to end its suffering. At her side marched one battalion, the 332nd Company, helmets painted to match her face, led by a man who had come to believe in her more than in the Republic itself, Commander Rex. They descended. Through fire and war ignited once more. Maul had seen it in the Force. He had felt it before it began. Not just the siege, but the shape of destiny behind it. In the shadows of Sundari's throne room, he whispered truths the galaxy was not yet ready to hear. The Jedi were falling. The Clone Wars were not a war, they were a trap. He had seen it all because he had once stood at the feet of the one who designed it. And he knew the dark tide could not be stopped. But he would not fall quietly. He did not seek to win. He sought to burn the chessboard, and so more raged across the underlevels, his blades slicing through clones like a god of fury. He offered Ahsoka a vision. Leave this war, let it die. Join him not in alliance, but in rebellion against the coming doom. But Ahsoka refused, not because she did not believe him, but because she did, and still she chose to stand alone. Their duel tore through the domes like a storm of memory and flame. Mandalore had seen 1,000 such duels. Mandalore the Great against the Jedi, Vizsla against Kenobi, warrior against warrior, but this one was different. This was not for rule. It was for the soul. And the soul bled. When Maul fell screaming into the abyss. Captured but not broken, the people of Sundari did not cheer. They listened, they watched, they waited, and then the silence broke. The Republic claimed victory. Satine's dream, Bo-Katan's rebellion, Ahsoka's stand-it should have meant rebirth. But war never ends with battle. It ends in silence. And that silence was Order 66. Ahsoka, now marked as an enemy. Rex, now forced to turn his blaster on the one person he trusted. The clones, now puppets without will, blades drawn against their own brothers, and Maul, freed by the chaos. Mandalore, once again, was left behind. The Jedi left, the Republic died, the Empire rose, and in the ashes of the siege, Bo-Katan stood alone, the throne unclaimed, the darksaber gone, taken not by a man, not even by Maul, but by fate. The creed had cracked, not because they were defeated, but because they had allowed outsiders to decide their future. They had asked the Jedi for help, and in return, they received fire. They had let the Republic walk their holes, and now those holes were dust. They had watched as Jedi and Sith alike spilled their war across Mandalore. When both were gone, only silence remained. The clans fractured again. Some followed Bo-Katan, hoping to rebuild. Others scattered, dreaming of old glories, and some turned to the dark. The siege of Mandalore was not just the end of a war, it was the end of belief. For centuries, the Mandalorians had believed in strength, in honor, in victory through battle. But now, they saw, the galaxy did not reward strength. It devoured it. The strong were broken. The honorable were betrayed. The victorious were only the next targets. The creed, that sacred code of identity, no longer united them. Some called for isolation, others for vengeance, and others for profit. And so, the Mandalorians, once one people under one war, God shattered again into fragments. The stars scattered their clans. The Empire would come soon, but they would not conquer, they would recruit. The future of Mandalore was not to be ruled by warriors or queens. It would be shaped by mercenaries, assassins, foundlings, and ghosts. And in the deep vaults of the Empire, far from Mandalore's skies, the darksaber waited once more for the next hand, for the next myth, for the next fall. Chapter 9: The Empire's Chains of Beskar. The fires of Sundari had barely cooled when the Empire arrived, not as conquerors, but as redeemers. They spoke not of enslavement, but of order. They brought not legions of stormtroopers, but contracts. And slowly, beneath the dome's cracked sky, the Mandalorians made a choice that would haunt them across generations. They traded their creed for survival. The Clone Wars were over, but the Empire's war had just begun. Imperial banners did not wave atop the great spires of Mandalore. They hovered quiet, watching, cold. Governor Gar Saxon, loyal to the new emperor, knelt before no man. He wore imperial black over Mandalorian steel. He served not tradition, but command. He was the bridge and the blade. Through him, the Empire learned everything it needed to know. Bskr, the sacred metal of Mandalore, was no longer armor. It was currency, and the Empire wanted it all. At first, the clans resisted. Some fought in shadows, striking out from caverns and mountains, invoking the ancient rites of war. But the Empire did not fight like warriors. It bled them slowly. It severed supply lines. It poisoned unity. It offered one clan favor, another punishment. It sowed mistrust like salt in the wounds of an already broken people. The Death Watch was shattered. The Night Owls scattered. The Protectors silenced. And Bo-Katan Kryze's last hope of Satine's dream was cast aside. Her refusal to serve the Empire was her doom. And in her place, Gar Saxon was crowned Viceroy of Mandalore. The title meant nothing, but the chains beneath it were very real. The Empire's engineers learned quickly. They harvested Beskar in secret. They twisted it into new forms. Not only armor but restraints, weapons, tools of domination. The same metal that had once stood against Jedi was now used to bind Mandalorians to their knees. A few resisted. Some vanished, and some chose another path. The bounty hunter guilds flourished in the Outer Rim, and among them, Mandalorians found a new role, not as warriors of a cause, but as weapons for hire. Their helmets became symbols not of honor but of fear. Their creed was no longer about unity but profit. What had once been sacred now became scattered. The darksaber, stolen in the chaos of the siege, passed through dark hands. Maul, hunted and broken, fled to the shadows, but the blade remained. Behind, hidden in the vaults of Dathomir, buried with ghosts. And no one claimed it, not because they could not, but because no one believed in it. Anymore, the young grew up in silence. The old buried their stories, and the Empire took what it wanted. Yet, deep within the sands of Concordia, hidden in vaults beneath forgotten moons, a whisper remained. This is the way. It began not as a rebellion, but as a memory, a scattered remnant of an ancient tribe guided by a new voice. The armorer, cloaked in myth, speaking in echoes, she taught the foundlings a path older than Satine, older than Deathwatch, older even than Mandalore the First. It was not politics. It was not conquest. It was faith. Never remove your helmet. Never forsake the creed. Forge your armor in fire and protect the foundlings. This sect would not rise in open war. They would rise in the cracks, in the ashes, in the void left by the Empire's cold grip. But they were not ready. Not yet. And so the years passed. Gar Saxon's reign turned to rot. He ruled through terror, backed by the Empire's weapons and spies. And when his rule finally broke, when Clan Ren, led by Sabine, rose against him, the spark was lit. For a moment, the darksaber returned. Sabine Wren, artist and warrior, held the blade. But she did not seek to lead. She passed it to Bo-Katan, and the clans followed. For a heartbeat of history, Mandalore stood united, but the Empire was watching. And its vengeance was not war, it was purge, the night of 1,000. Tears the domes shattered, the vaults burned. The warriors were gunned down from above by droids and firebombs. Not even Beskar could withstand the full weight of orbital bombardment. Sundari fell again, but this time there were no survivors, no throne, no war cry. Only Ash.Bo-Katan lived but failed. The Darksaber was lost again, and Mandalore became a graveyard, not just of warriors, but of hope. The Empire did not claim Mandalore. It buried it, declared it cursed, poisoned, uninhabitable, a lie, wrapped in smoke, a warning to all. This is what happens when you defy the Empire. The Mandalorians became phantoms, their forges darkened, their songs silenced, their children hidden. Only the few who walked the way remembered. Only the creed survived. Not in cities, but in caves. Not in armies, but in whispers. The creed was no longer the soul of a people. It was their last breath, and still it endured. The Empire believed it had crushed Mandalore, but it had only scattered its fire into embers, and in the darkness of the purge, in the silence of the ashes, something ancient stirred. A survivor would rise. Not a king, not a queen, not a Jedi, not even a warrior, but a foundling. A child who would be chosen not by clan or blood, but by armor. A child who would be protected not by an army, but by a single man who never removed his helmet, and in his arms lay the future of Mandalore. The past was buried, but destiny was not dead, not yet. Chapter 10. The Foundling and the Flame from the bones of a dead world, the stars watched in silence. Mandalore had become legend, a name spoken only in shadows and shame. The children of the Creed lived in exile, drifting like ghosts through the cracks of a galaxy ruled by tyrants. And yet, from the forgotten tunnels of Navarro, a spark began. To move through the dark, a spark cradled not in prophecy, but in arms of Beskar. He was called Din Djarin. He was no lord, no leader, no son of Mandalore by birth. He was a foundling rescued in fire, raised in ritual, forged in silence. He did not speak of past or pain. He knew only the creed. The armorer had watched over him since the moment war droids tore his childhood apart. She molded him not into a soldier of vengeance, but into a vessel of tradition. Every plate of Beskar upon his body was a vow, every mission a penance. Every bounty claimed was another coin offered to the forge, not for wealth, but for remembrance. And in time, he became what they all were beneath the steel, alone. But the Force has its own rhythms, its own music, its own long game, in the cold void beyond the stars. The hunter was sent on a contract like any other to retrieve a target for remnants of an empire that should have died. No name, no question, just coordinates and coin. But what he found was not an enemy. It was a child, small, silent, with eyes too wide for this galaxy and power, too old to belong to the living Grogu. The stars would come to know him by that name. But to Din Djarin he was something else. He was foundling. The creed demanded protection, and so the Mandalorian chose. He broke the chain of prophet. He broke the chain of silence, and in doing so, he rebuilt the chain of Mandalore. The Empire came for the child. They sent hunters, soldiers, war machines, Moff Gideon, wielder of the Darksaber itself, a man who had no right to touch such a relic, a man who sought to twist the ancient weapon into a tool of experimentation, a man who believed Mandalore was broken because he had seen it burn. But Mandalore was not dead. It had only become small, a child, a warrior, a creed together. Din and Grogu ran not just from blaster fire, but from destiny. They were pursued across forgotten moons and starless gulfs, each step awakening something deeper. Grogu's power grew, and with it, so did Din's understanding. He had lived for years with his face behind steel, but for this child, he would give even that up, and he did. To protect the foundling, he removed his helmet, and in doing so, he shattered his place among the tribe. For the creed was sacred, and to break it was death. But the armorer did not kill him. She exiled him, and exiled for a man is a deeper wound than death. Yet he did not retreat into despair. Instead, he sought the history of the Darksaber, the truth of Mandalore's fall, the meaning of the mythosaur, the great beast that even the first Mandalore was said to have tamed. And with every answer, a new path was forged in the fire of loss. Bo-Katan Kryze returned to the fold, her pride broken, her army gone, her castle in ruins. She had once claimed the Darksaber without victory, and Mandalore had paid the price. But when Din Djarin won the blade by right of combat, she refused to take it by theft again, and so the blade stayed with him. A hunter, a foundling, a warrior of no name and every name. And behind him, something ancient began to stir. Others returned to Mandalore not to rule, but to redeem. They found not a cursed planet, but one still breathing. Ruined, yes, but alive. The atmosphere could be endured. The surface walked. The forges dash rebuilt. And beneath it all, in the waters of the mines, the mythosaur slept a dream, a sign, a warning. The armorer saw it and believed. Bo-Katan saw it and changed, and Din Djarin saw nothing. But in Grogu's silence, he felt it. The child was more than a passenger, more than a bounty. He was the future. The Jedi came for him. Luke Skywalker himself, legend, warrior, son of Vader, forward him a path of power. But Grogu chose love over legacy. And in that moment, the galaxy turned, not with the boom of blasters or the weight of ships, but with the bond between a child and his father. For Din Djarin was no longer just a foundling. He was a Mandalorian, and Grogu was no longer just a child of the Force. He was a Mandalorian apprentice. Together they became the path, not to war, but to rebirth. In secret, the creed was REFORGED. In silence, the flame RELIT. The Empire's chains, once cast from Beskar, now melted in the fire of family. And in the depths of a broken world, a new Mandalore stirred. Not one of conquest, not one of crowns, but one of FOUNDLINGS, one of faith. And in the shadows, the mythosaur began to open its eyes. Chapter 11. The awakening below the ashes, beneath the shattered crust of Mandalore. Something ancient stirred. The mines, once hollowed by the greed of warlords and the flames of civil war, had gone silent for decades. Ash blanketed the soil. Shadows ruled the deep. And yet there, in the black beneath the black, a shape moved slowly through forgotten water. A breath, a pulse, a beast older than Beskar. The mythosaur, long thought extinct, long spoken of only in song and symbol, lived it. It had not been seen in the age of empires. It had not roared since the first Mandalore tamed it with nothing but spirit and steel. But the Force, in its great cycles of birth and ruin, had called to it once more, not through violence, not through prophecy, but through return, through the sacred presence of warriors who remembered their creed, not as doctrine, but as truth. Bo-Katan Kryze descended. First, in armor worn and scraped by loss, Her belief in unity had faded. Her pride had been shattered by defeat. But when she stood beneath the living waters and gazed into the dark, she saw the eye of a god staring back. It did not strike. It did not flee. It only watched, as if waiting for something or someone. She said nothing, for to speak of gods is to cheapen them. And still she followed the fire. Din Djarin did not see the beast, but he felt its gravity in every step. His return to Mandalore was not for conquest, but for cleansing, to bathe in the sacred water, to be redeemed, not for the galaxy, but for the child who watched him always, through quiet eyes and sacred silence. Grogu, the small one, the old one, the orphan of the Jedi, had no name in the creed, yet he carried it within him more deeply than most. He leapt to save his father. He chose to stay when he could have left, and in his presence the Force and the creed began to touch like twin rivers meeting for the first time in millennia. The dark saber passed from hand to hand, not through trickery or inheritance, but through deserved right. Bo-Katan, once a princess of the doomed house Kryze, now held it again, not as a weapon, but as a burden. The others followed, not because she demanded loyalty, but because she had walked the ashes and returned with light. The clans reassembled, children of the Watch, survivors of Concord, Dawn, Night Owls, even those who once fought under imperial banners, those who had worn the armor as slaves, not heirs, now stood side by side. Mandalore began to breathe again. The armorer guided the rebuilding in silence, her hammer ringing out in the tunnels like a heartbeat echoing through time. She was neither queen nor general, but they listened to her as if she were the stone of the planet itself. Her words were few, her eyes unseen, but her vision was clear. The forge is lit. It was enough. Grogu, now armored in the smallest, Beskar, ever shaped, moved among them like a ghost of things to come. He spoke not with words, but with presence. They called him Foundling. But beneath his quiet strength, the mythosaur stirred again. Some began to whisper, was it he who would tame it? Not with a saber, but with spirit. Yet the galaxy beyond did not sleep. The remnants of the Empire grew bold again. In secret chambers and dark factories, new legions were forged in of flesh and blood, but of clones, of commanders, of forgotten ambitions dressed in steel. Gideon had returned no longer in the name of Empire, but in the name of himself. He donned armor, black as void, forged from Beskar, shaped not by tradition, but by fear. He did not seek Mandalore to lead it. He sought to consume it, to make himself a god by stealing its myth, its creed, and its soul. He failed, for Mandalore did not rise through power. It rose through remembrance. The battle for the Great Forge was not one of armies, it was one of identities. Warriors fell, fires burned, but in the deepest heart of the planet, Bo-Katan led with the blade, Din fought without command, and Grogatini ancient sacred saved them both, not by killing, but by shielding. He held back the fire with the Force itself, and in that moment the mythosaur moved, beneath the molten tunnels, beneath the living waters, beneath the silence of history. The god of the Mandalorians turned its head toward the surface and listened. The Imperials were broken. Gideon, consumed by his own fire, and Mandalore was reborn. But they did not seek to reclaim the galaxy. They did not declare war. They simply rebuilt. The creed was rewritten, not with new laws, but with new faces. The children returned. The foundlings were protected. The darksaber lost again in the fire was mourned not as a weapon, but as a symbol no longer needed. For the mythosaur had awakened, and in the quiet of a healed land, all knew this. The next ruler of Mandalore would not be crowned by blade or by blood. They would be carried by the will of the people, the bond of the creed, and the call of the ancient beast beneath the sea of Ashdod, and somewhere in the stillness of the mines, the mythosaur waited once more, not for war, but for the one who would ride. Chapter 12. The Mandalore. That is yet to come. The fire had dimmed. The darksaber was gone. The cities were broken. And yet, from silence, something sacred began to rise. Mandalore was not a place, not a throne, not a weapon. It was a memory carried in the blood, and now, for the first time in 1,000 years, that blood ran warm again. The forges were rebuilt, not by rulers, but by survivors. The old cities remained buried in ash, yet life returned in domes, in caverns, in the tunnels that once sheltered children from the bombs of the sky. Each spark of the forge sang the creed in its own language. Each clang of Beskar against flame echoed through the bones of the planet like the footsteps of the ancestors watching, waiting, remembering. There was no Mandalore now. No one had claimed the mantle. No one had dared. And still they gathered, not for conquest, but for renewal. The clans met under stars not seen in generations. On Concordia they spoke of old betrayals. On Kalevala they whispered of peace. From deep in the outer rim came forgotten names and ancient sigils: mythosaur, rook, shriekhawk. No longer enemies, no longer splintered. Their eyes turned not to war, but to the child who watched in silence, the smallest warrior, the one who had walked through fire, shielded by the Force, and come out whole. Grow Jew. He was not born Mandalorian, yet he had become one, not through battle, but through choice, and the mythosaur still stirred, far beneath the living waters. Its breath was slow, but present. Its spirit, once dormant, now pulsed with a strange and ancient rhythm, as if time itself bent around it. It had not been ridden in millennia, not since the first Mandalore stood upon its crown and raised his blade to the moons. And yet now, the old beast waited not for dominance, but for understanding. Grow. Gu would not ride it as a conqueror. He would ride it as one who hears. The armorers whispered of a new, prophesied not spoken, not written, but felt in dreams. The child who chose the creed over the saber, the child who bridged warrior and mystic, would awaken Mandalore's second age, not through fire, but through balance. They called him Mandalore, the gentle, not for his weakness, but for his mercy. Still, the shadows did not die. Across the stars, fragments of the Empire regrouped like carrion around old bone. In the unknown, regions, secrets bred in silence. In dark laboratories, clones were shaped not for war, but for legacy. The dream of domination had not died. It only shifted its mask. And still Mandalore did not march, for they had learned the past could not be reclaimed by fire, only by foundation. And so they taught again. The children were trained in jetpack and in song. The old chants returned. This is the way became not a prison of rules, but a path of belonging. Even those who once removed their helmets now walked beside the watchnot as heretics, but as kin. The creed was not changed, but it was understood, and in the silence of the forge, the armorer, older now, slower, but ever steady, passed her tools to younger hands. The next generation, born of fire and dust, carried the knowledge not in tomes but in gesture. how to shape Beskar without breaking it, how to weld family into armor, how to walk into battle with no fear of death, because death was never the end. One day, the child would speak, not in words, but in presence. He would stand at the edge of the water. The mythosaur would rise not in rage, but in recognition. There would be no reins, no sovereign, no command, only the force, the creed, and the bond that needs no language, and all of Mandalore would kneel, not to a king, but to a beginning, for the age of swords had passed, the age of spirit had begun. Grogu would not lead through fear, he would guide through truth, and the clans, scattered for centuries, would become one people again, not through victory but through remembrance. Their war was not with the stars, it was with forgetting, and now they remembered. The Mandalore that is yet to come does not wear a crown, he wears hope, and beneath his feet the old beast stirs once more, its breath a wind through the caverns, its heart a drum beneath the ash, its soul waiting, waiting not for blood, but for balance. And as the twin moons rose again over a world once thought lost, a whisper passed through the deepest halls of stone. The Mandalorians have returned, but this time they will not fall. Chapter 13. The ghosts of Sundar Abenioth, the shattered crust of Mandalore. Beneath stone and ruin, beneath cities that had once touched the stars, there still lay the bones of Sundari. The dome was gone, crushed by flame and time. The towers were broken, their spires leaning like the ribs of some dead colossus. But the spirit of the city was not dead. It lingered, watching, listening, breathing beneath the dust. For centuries, Sundari had stood as a monument to man, pride and contradiction, built by pacifists, conquered by warriors, shared by clans, sects, spies, and prophets. Its halls had echoed with footsteps of both tyrants and saints. Duchess Satine had walked here once, her voice soft as silk. So too had Maul, his blade red as ruin. So too had Bo-Katan, Din Djarin, Gideon, and even the dark saber itself. Their shadows still whispered through the ruins. But it was not only the living who spoke here. The ghosts had never left. They walked in silence, draped in armor, faces hidden by helmets long rusted shut. They moved through the empty halls, through the crumbled throne room, through the ash-laden corridors of the former palace, not vengeful, not tormented, simply present, as if they, too, were waiting for something. The living waters flowed even here, deep beneath the throne, beneath the capital's heart. Those who walked the way would descend, step by sacred step, and feel the chill rise up through their boots. The echoes of ancient chants still clung to the stone, the oath, the creed, the binding breath between one generation and the next. Sundari may have fallen, but its memory did not forget how to kneel. Once Sundari had been a place of rule. Now it was a place of reckoning. The new Mandalorians returned not with weapons, but with candles. In the dark, they lit the old halls with flame. In silence, they pressed their foreheads to broken walls and recited the names of the dead. The children sang, the elders wept, and in the deepest vaults, the mythosaur stirred once more. Not in rage, but in recognition, for even in ruin, this was still Mandalore, and the spirits were listening. Bo-Katan stood among them, older now, no crown, no title, only her armor and her memory. She had once ruled from this very place. Now she came not to rule, but to understand. Her boots echoed in the same hall where Satine had argued peace, and Maul had spilled blood. She touched the cracked throne, not with desire, but with sorrow. "I failed you," she whispered, and the shadows did not answer. They only watched, not in judgment, but in witness. Din Djarin walked beside her, the child in his arms. Grogu did not speak. His ears twitched. His wide eyes searched the empty chamber, as if seeing things no one else could. He reached out, not with hands, but with the Force, and the ghosts moved closer. They did not fear him. They knew him in his blood, Jedi in his spirit, foundling in his choice. Mandalore. The forgers returned to Sundari first. They moved rubble stone by stone, clearing paths, exposing chambers long sealed. They found Beskar buried beneath wreckage, inscribed with the names of lost clans. They polished it, melted it, reforged it. The armor made from Sundari's bones was different. It shimmered with a light both old and strange, as if the city itself had blessed it. And then they found the vault buried beneath the palace, sealed since the Great Purge. It held relics thought destroyed blades from the Mandalorian crusades, ancient jetpacks, hollers of past rulers, and a single, untouched holorecord of Duchess Satine's final speech. Her voice flickered to life, broken by static. Yet it carried. "To be Mandalorian," she said, "is not to conquer, but to choose again and again to stand for one another." No one spoke. Even the flames bowed low. The ghosts moved closer still, for they remembered her. She had died for peace, but now, perhaps, peace would live because of her. And yet, something darker lingered too, a wound deep in the stone. A whisper that came not from the dead but from what they had left behind. Remnants of Imperial research, strange machinery, cloning chambers half destroyed, a throne beneath the city red, jagged, unnatural, not Mandalorian, not Imperial. Something older, as if a darkness had seeded itself beneath Sundari's bones long before the purge. Watching, growing, the armorer called it the rot below. She warned the clans. The ghosts are not the only ones who remember. For even as Sundari healed, something unseen stirred deeper still. Something that wore no face, that spoke no language, but waited. And as the city's first fires were rekindled and children walked its streets again, a shadow slithered through the stone, not to conquer, but to return. Chapter 14. The helm and the hollow crowned. There is power in a symbol, a blade, a sigil, a helm, but no symbol binds more tightly or breaks more bitterly than a crown. And in Mandalorian history there was no crown more cursed, more coveted, more damning than the one forged in flame, the Darksaber. Not born of royalty, yet it ruled as surely as any throne. Not a relic of peace, but a beacon of blood, passed from hand to hand, era to era. It carved Mandalore's fate as much as Mandalore carved the galaxies. Now it had returned, not by conquest, but by gift. Din Djarin had yielded it, freely, quietly, without war, without challenge. In that silent offering, he shattered 1,000 years of Mandalorian pride, a creed built on combat, undone by honor. And Bo-Katan, who had once lost everything for that blade, took it not as a queen but as a penitent. The saber sang in her hand, but it felt heavy with history, with failure, with ghosts that clung to every inch of its hilt. In the days that followed, she wielded it only in ceremony, never in anger. She walked through the ruins of Sundari with the blade ignited, not as a weapon, but as a torch, to light the way. For those who remembered, for those who returned, for those who still believed Mandalore could be reborn. But even rebirth has a cost. The clans had reassembled, but they were not one. The children of the Watch kept their helmets on. The night owls did not kneel. The Death Watch was a name none dared speak aloud, and House Vizsla watched Bo-Katan with quiet suspicion, their bloodline forever tied to the blade she now carried. In whispers, the old rivalries breathed again. Some said Mandalore had no ruler, only a caretaker. Others said the Darksaber demanded more than peace. It demanded power. And beneath it all, the silence of the deep halls thickened, as if the stone itself remembered the screams. Bo-Katan convened the clans in the great dome of the palace ruins, not to declare herself ruler, but to ask. In her hand, the Darksaber, at her side, Din Djarin and the child. Around her, warriors in Beskar of every color, shape, and creed. The flickering flames cast long shadows. The throne remained empty. "I do not want your throne," she said. "I want your trust. I want your choice." For a moment, no one moved. Then, the armorer stepped forward. Her voice echoed, calm as steel in ice. "We are scattered people," she said, "scattered by war, by pride, by the blood of our own kin. If we are to rise again, it will not be beneath a crown. It will be beneath a creed." Bo-Katan extinguished the blade, and nearly dot. It was not command that brought unity that night. It was surrender. And so the Darksaber was not placed in a vault, nor hidden, nor destroyed. It was mounted upon the wall behind the empty throne, a warning. Its light dimmed. Its legend ended. For Mandalore would not kneel to a blade again. But darkness does not rest easily far below. Where the waters moved silent and strange, the rot still whispered. The ruins of the cloning chambers hummed with residual energy. Droids sent to dismantle. Them returned, changed, their memories wiped, their eyes dim. One by one, they fell into silence. And then into madness. Whispers spread among the forgers, that a shadow moved beneath the palace, that it wore no armor, that it had no name. And then, one night, the throne room grew cold, not with wind, but with presence. Bo-Katan stood alone there, lit only by the embers of the forge fires, and as she turned to leave, she felt it. Something behind her, something watching. She drew no weapon. She spoke no word, but her breath turned to frost, and the Darksaber behind her, hummed, not brightly, but in warning. Elsewhere, the child stirred in his sleep, his dreams filled with black flame. The mythosaur, asleep beneath the mines, opened one golden eye, for Mandalore had buried its past, but something had been buried with it. Chapter 15. The black flame beneath the black flame was never a weapon, not truly. It was not forged, nor lit, nor summoned with chanting hands. It was born, as all curses are, in silence and fear and prophecy. Long before it burned in the hearts of men, it smouldered in the bones of Mandalore, the bloody, in the ruins of forgotten tombs, in the voids between starfire and memory, and in the final days of Mandalorian glory, as the stars turned cold to their banners. The black flame rose again, not on a world, but in a name, Vizsla. From the ashes of endless betrayals, there came one who would fan this ancient fire, Taurian Vizsla, heir of houses long lost and brother to the buried sins of the Death Watch. He stood in the obsidian ruins of the old Mandalorian cathedrals, where prayers once echoed to no gods at all, and he drank the war words of his ancestors as though they were sacred flame. "Return the creed to its roots," he whispered. "Return the armor to the blood." In his voice, the black flame stirred, woken not by light, but by shadow's hunger. He would reignite not only the dark saber, but the ancient doctrine it once served. The clans were scattered then, broken into wandering sects and hollow names. The pacifist remnants of Sundari wore silk instead of steel, and their children learned art while forgetting how to fight. But the true Mandalorians, those who believed, war was the only prayer saw, Vizsla not as tyrant, but as prophet. His voice did not ask for loyalty, it demanded atonement. And in his rise, the black flame beneath the Mandalorians roared upward, devouring reason, devouring peace. He called upon the shrines of the old creed, carved from the bone worlds of Ordo and Concordia. He called upon the long-forgotten foundlings of the Outer Rim, who wore broken armor and broken names. He called upon the disillusioned warriors who had watched Jedi burn their ancestors and Imperial warlords cage their culture. And they came, not for glory, not even for they came for vengeance because, in Vizsla's breath, they smelled the death song of the past, and it made them whole. So rose the black flame, sacred and profane. The children of the Watch returned in silence, building shrines in secret, forging armor in dark caverns, speaking only in creed and ritual. They did not remove their helmets, they did not forget, they did not forgive, and in time their creed evolved into dogma, and their dogma into judgment. Those who would not bow to the flame were cast out, and so the Mandalorians turned upon themselves once more, not in civil war, but in doctrinal purge. For what is a creed, if not a blade pointed inward? But the galaxy did not pause for their wars of belief. The Republic fell, the Jedi fell, and in the shadows rose a different fire colder, vaster, hungry not for faith, but for order. The Empire. Its grip was not immediate, nor complete, but it watched, and it waited. And when the Mandalorians turned upon each other, the Empire turned upon them. Not with armies, but with architects. Not with fire, but with control. The black flame was not extinguished. It was contained. Vizsla's movement fractured some, fled to the Outer Rim. Others buried themselves in rituals. Others fell silent, waiting for a true heir of the Darksaber. The weapon itself vanished into legend, passed from traitor to brother to exile. And still the black flame pulsed in secret, in bloodlines and battle cries, in scars and in stories told under breath. The flame could not be destroyed, only forgotten, only denied, only feared. And then came the one who would reignite it without knowing, a child born in shadow, a hunter of bounties, a warrior of few words. He wore the armor, but not the creed. He bore the name, but not the blood. Din Djarin he knew not the flame that walked beside him, only the code passed from hidden forge to hidden forge. But destiny is not bound by knowledge, and the force which binds all things, even those who deny it, guided him to the weapon, to the Darksaber, to the legacy. And when he held it aloft, in combat, not as a Vizsla, but as a foundling, not as a prophet, but as a protector, the black flame stirred again, not in war, but in confusion. The Mandalorians looked to him and saw not a leader, but a question. Could a man without bloodline, or prophecy, or heritage reignite Mandalore? Could the flame burn without destroying? Could a creed survive without devouring itself? Taurian Vizsla's old followers said no. The children of the Watch said yes. And the galaxy watching from behind armored eyes waited. For prophecy does not end. It only coils. And beneath all of this, beneath the Darksaber's hum, beneath the helmet's glare, Beneath the creed's silence the black flame still breathes. It watches, it hungers, for one more war, for one more heir, for one more fall. And so the question is not who will lead the Mandalorians. The question is, what will lead them, the flame or the force, the creed or the chaos, the past or the myth. The black flame waits, its heat rises, its whisper returns, and far beneath the sands of Mandalore, something stirs. Chapter 16. The mask that spoke no name in the hollow beneath the forge, where iron met silence and silence met prayer, there stood one who did not speak her name. And yet all who saw her bowed in reverence, as though her presence answered a question they did not know they had asked. She was called the Armorer, not because she made armor, but because she remade identity. In the dark age that followed Mandalore's fall, when the clans were broken, scattered like ash across a cold galaxy, it was she who gathered the fragments. Not through command, not through fire, but through ritual, through silence, through a mask. And though her face was never seen, her presence was undeniably, though the creed itself had taken form, wearing golden beskar, bearing the fire of the old ways in her voice. To many she was myth, to others a priestess, but to the children of the Watch she was more than memory. She was lore. She was the voice of the Mandalore that had not yet returned. She spoke not of conquest. She spoke not of glory. She spoke only of the way, the sacred path forgotten by the weak and diluted by the pacifists who had once ruled from Sundari's glass throne. This is the way, she said, and though her tone was soft, it rang with the weight of prophecy. Her forge became a temple, and her words became commandments. Helmets were never removed. Speech was measured. Deeds, not names, defined the soul. And in the quiet underworlds of forgotten systems, her foundlings grew. Warriors not of blood, but of belief. Bound not by clan, but by creed. They spoke little of the past, but they lived as if the past had never ended. In them, the black flame dimmed, but it did not die. It was transmuted, controlled, sealed behind beskar, but beneath her discipline, beneath the ritual and restraint, there lay something more ancient than even the creed. Memory. The Armorer remembered what others chose to forget: the fall of Mandalore, the betrayal of the Jedi, the curse of the Darksaber, the civil wars that tore brother from brother. She remembered the siege, the glassing, the great purge that left nothing but shadow on a scorched world. And it was from this ruin that she shaped her foundlings, to avenge the past, but to survive it, to carry it in silence, in armor, in devotion. She did not seek to rule Mandalore. She sought to prepare those who would one day return. And so she became more than a leader. She became a vessel. Among those she raised, one would rise in quiet. Conflicting Jaren, the silent son of war, bearer of the Darksaber, unknowing heir to burdens older than blood. He brought to her a child, not a foundling of creed, but of the Force, a being of prophecy and power, hunted by empires and haunted by silence. Grogu, and in that moment, the Armorer faced the unknowable. For the Jedi, those ancient enemies of Mandalore had once again touched the fate of her people. Yet she did not reject the child, nor did she cling to hatred. She simply spoke. The songs of eons past foretold of such a being. She knew then, as the stars once whispered, that destiny had returned to Mandalorian hands, not as a sword, but as a choice. Still, the path was not without conflict. Others from the ashes returned. Bo-Katan cries, sister of the doomed Duchess. Satine, bearer of royal blood and rebel fire. She too sought the darksaber. She too claimed the right to rule. But she had failed before failed to unite the clans, failed to hold the saber, failed to preserve the very world she now mourned. To the armorer, Kryze was not unworthy, but she was of another creed, one that had fallen. And so the two stood, in silent judgment of each other. Kryze, with her bloodline, the armorer, with her silence, and between them the saber burned. Yet it would not be war that decided their fate. It would be the return to Mandalore, the poisoned planet, the world believed cursed, believed uninhabitable, believed lost. But prophecy does not sleep. Beneath its glass something stirred, and when Din Djarin stepped foot upon that sacred soil, not as conqueror, but as penitent, the curse was broken. He bathed in the living waters. He spoke the creed. He was redeemed. And in his redemption, others followed. The forges were lit again. The air was breathed again. The silence was broken. The armorer watched this, not with pride, but with purpose. She knew that fire draws shadow, that rebirth brings war, that the darksaber would not stay in one hand for long. And as the clans returned, as Bo-Katan stood once more among them, as the mythosaur stirred beneath the mines of Mandalore, Armorer made her choice not of allegiance, but of destiny. She allowed Kryze to lead. She allowed the past to breathe. For she knew the one who walks both worlds must be given the flame. And so, the creed endured not as law, but as foundation. The armorer became less visible, her voice less frequent, her presence more ethereal. She had done what none had done before her, held the flame without letting it consume her. She was never Mandalore. She never needed to be. She was the mask that spoke no name, and in her silence 1,000 foundlings found their path. Yet even now, in the deep tunnels of Mandalore's new life, where Beskar is reforged and banners are sown in shadow, something stirs. A whisper beneath the steel, a prophecy not yet spoken. The black flame has not died. It has only taken new shape. For while the Mandalorians may unite in creed and blood, destiny is never silent for long, and somewhere beyond the stars, the mask awaits a new wearer, one who will not speak, one who will not choose, one who will become the flame itself. Chapter 17. The Night Hammer returns in the void between stars, where gravity breaks and old names echo like wounds. A shadow stirred blacker than Beskar, colder than the grave, older than the creed itself. They called it the Night Hammer, though few still lived who remembered the true weight of that name. A myth wrapped in metal, a warship forged for extinction, a curse sealed behind a woman's vengeance. For this was the dread vessel of Sabine Wren's darkest inheritance, the ship of General Bo-Katan's shattered house. The last instrument of death once wielded by a soul twisted beyond recovery. Tari Vizsla's legacy defiled and weaponized by Mandalorians who had forgotten the way. And now, in the fragile rebirth of Mandalore, as forges glowed and banners stitched themselves into unity, this ghost returned not as a relic, but as reckoning. It was not summoned by the darksaber, nor awakened by creed. It moved of its own will, a war spirit unchained. Beneath its hull, worlds had burned, cities had vanished, Jedi had bled, and now it drifted silently toward Mandalore, no longer crewed by the living, but by the memory of vengeance itself. It was not the Empire that had reawakened it, nor the Sith. It was the Signalan, ancient, encoded, Mandalorian distress code lost since the purge, recently broadcast from the rebuilt forges of Sindari's core. Some remnant within the ship's datavo had stirred, and as reassembled upon the scorched world, hammering out unity in ritual and silence. The Night Hammer answered the call not as a savior, but as a test, for it carried not just weapons, but prophecy. Its hull bore the markings of the kin of death, watch of House Saxon, of crimes that had not been forgiven by time, and from its hangar emerged not warriors, but something older armored shades, draped in sigils long forbidden, wearing helmets fused to their skulls by fire and oath. Not true Mandalorians, not anymore, but zealots of the past, the scions of the void. They called themselves followers of a forgotten splinter cult that believed Mandalore survival could only come through endless war. Their creed was not honor, it was extinction, and so the children of the Watch, the clans of cries, the silent disciples of the Armorer were faced with a challenge they had not expected. Not Empire, not Jedi, but their own reflection, twisted and blood-soaked. The Night Hammer hung above Sundari like a second moon, and as its descent began, the light beneath Mandalore's surface dimmed. For the Scions did not seek to conquer. They sought to cleanse, to burn away the new unity and restore the Mandalorians to a single, pure war cult, forged in betrayal and blood. They claimed to follow Tari Vizsla's true path. They believed the Darksaber had been corrupted by peace. They had come not to take Mandalore, but to erase it. And as the ship neared orbit, its hull opened, revealing a weapon thought lost in time, the Star Sunder cannon, an ancient relic capable of glassing entire cities in a single pulse, a device outlawed even in the days of Revan. It was then that the Armorer summoned the clans, not with command, not with threat, but with silence. Her forge burned bright, and her words were few. We are tested not by our enemies, but by our past. Bo-Katan stood beside her not as rival, but as equal. Din Djarin, now wielder of the saber, said nothing. But Grogu, small and silent, placed a hand upon the flame and the flame did not burn him. A sign, a choice. The clans gathered not just in numbers, but in purpose. The Armorer called for no sacrifice. She offered no promise of victory, only this: we will not be broken again. Above them, the Night Hammer began to fire, not upon the forges, not upon the cities, but upon the living waters, the heart of Mandalorian memory. Its first beam struck the caverns, turning steam into screams. The second tore through the old domes of Sundari, awakening the mythosaur from its slumber with a howl that shattered glass across the moon. And from the smoke, the Scions descended, armored in rusted Beskar, draped in bones, chanting in the tongue of Death Watch. They bore whips of plasma, spears of bloodstone, rifles that hummed with stolen Jedi crystals. But their greatest weapon was belief-blind, unyielding, and violent. The battle was not a siege, it was a mirror. Mandalorian fought Mandalorian, each wearing the face of a past they had not buried deep enough. Foundling clashed with Zealot, clan sigils cracked under blaster fire. The Darksaber clashed with a weapon called Knight's Grasp, a cursed blade wielded by the Scion Leaderon, ancient descendant of Pre Vizsla, who claimed to speak to the dead. He called himself Malgrax, the last shadow, and his voice echoed with the wrath of 1,000 fallen warlords. He sought the saber not to rule, but to shatter it, to end the line of Tari once and for all. Din Djarin faced him in the ash of Sundari's ruins. The duel did not feel like destiny, it felt like judgment. Blow for blow, Their blades sparked against the bones of Mandalore's sins. Malgrax moved like memory, cruel and precise, every strike a retelling of ancient betrayal. But Din had something older than technique. He had faith not in war, but in creed. And when the final blow came, it was not his saber that ended the fight, but Grogu, who lifted his small hand and froze time around the Scion leader, whispering a word no one understood. Word older than Mandalorian, older than Jedi. Malgrax's blade turned to dust, his breath left him, and he vanished into silence. The Night Hammer, sensing defeat, began its descent. A final act, a funeral pyre. But the clans did not flee. They stood together, Bo-Katan, Din, the armorer. Even the exiled Vizsla aimed their cannons skyward. The sky cracked, the ship burned, and when it fell, it did not break the world. It lit it anew. From the ruins, the black smoke rose, and with it, something else, a signal, not from the clans, not from the forges, but from beneath the living waters, deep within the planet's veins. A voice, ancient, cold, calling not to Mandalorians, but to something else entirely, something that remembers the mythosaur's first breath. Chapter 18. The Deep. Heart wakes beneath the scorched crust of Mandalore, past the ruins of domed cities, and the molten bones of 1,000 clans. There lies a place so old that even the songs of the first forgers do not name it. A vein beneath the world, older than war, older than language, older than the sky. There, in silence, undisturbed, since the age of myth, something breathes not in lungs, but in tremors. It was not born of flesh, nor forged of metal, but shaped by the heat of Mandalore's core when the stars were still young and wild. The living waters were but the surface of its dream, the mythosaur only its shadow. When the Night Hammer fell and its fire reached deep, the sacred blood of the planet stirred, and something ancient woke. The clans felt it first in their silence, in the vibration of Beskar against chest. The armorer paused her hammer mid-swing. Bo-Katan turned her gaze to the fissures in the ground, and Grogu, standing at the edge of the steaming caverns, trembled not with fear, but with knowing. For beneath them, far beneath them, the deep heart of Mandalore had begun to beat again, slow and thunderous, like a forge bellows breathing for the first time in millennia. It was said in the lost texts of the Tong that Mandalore was once alive, not metaphorically, but truly, a being of fire and stone who chose warriors as its voice, who gave its skin as metal, its breath as wind, its blood as water. And when the first Mandalore tamed the mythosaur, he did not tame a beast, but commune with the soul of the world. That connection was broken when war replaced ritual, when bloodline replaced creed, when Mandalorians forgot they were not conquerors of a planet, but children of it. Now, with unity restored in battle, the world began to remember. The ground cracked with glowing veins. The air thickened with the scent of smoke and memory. The fires beneath Sundari no longer raged, they whispered, and through the cracks in the earth something spoke, not in words, but in pressure, in rhythm, in sacred heat. The Mandalorians gathered in silence. The surviving clans stood at the edge of the crevice opened by the Night Hammer's fall. The forge light flickered. The water below boiled without flame. From that chasm rose, not lava, but mystic, black, and fragrant with the scent of old metal and bone. The armorer removed her helm, not in surrender, but in reverence. Her face bore the scars of fire, and yet she did not flinch. Knelt beside her, no longer a princess nor a rebel, but a daughter of the deep flame, Din Djarin stood, saber-sheathed, with Grogu upon his shoulder. Together, they waited not as rulers, not as warriors, but as listeners. Then came the voice. It did not echo through the air. It moved through Beskar, vibrating every plate, every weapon, every helm. It spoke of cycles, the rise and fall of the way, of how each age of unity gave birth to pride, and each age of pride led to ruin. It spoke of Deathwatch and of cries, of Saxon and Wren, of Django and Satine, of Maul and Vizsla, of the dark saber, passed like a curse. It spoke of Mandalore's children forgetting their mother, of the blood they spilled in her name, and the silence they offered in return. Then it asked a question. Are you ready to remember me? None answered, but the silence was enough. The mist thickened. The ground opened. From the depths rose a form not beast, not machine, not God. It had no shape that stayed constant, shifting between molten bone and plated shadow, between mythosaur and mountain. Its eyes were embers. Its breath scorched the air, and upon its back it bore armor not forged, but grown, inscribed with runes from before Mandalore had a name. It stepped into the crater, not as a monster, but as a memory walking again. The deep heart had taken form, not to rule, not to destroy, but to test it. Asked for no loyalty, it gave no commands. It simply was a truth long buried by creed and clan. The Mandalorians stood before it, wordless. Then one stepped forward, not a warrior, but a child. A foundling with no name, carrying a piece of shattered Beskar in his hand. He placed it at the being's feet, and the being knelt, placing one massive hand upon the boy's brow. For a moment, time bent. The clans saw themselves, not as they were, but as they had been, as they could be. They saw the war not as tragedy, but as transformation. Then the being stood and turned. With a single breath, it vanished into the earth, leaving behind only a mark burned into the grounder, spiral flame surrounded by 12 sigils, one for each ancient house. That night the clans gathered. They did not feast, they did not chant. They forged. In silence, each clan remade a piece of their armor, not to distinguish themselves, but to align. A new mark was added to each plater, burning spiral, symbol of the deep heart. The way was not restored. It was reborn, but far away. Beyond Mandalore's system, others watched. Remnants of the Empire, deep within the unknown regions. Darker things, older than Jedi or Sith. They felt the shift. They tasted the awakening. And in their silence, they did not fear Mandalore's rebirth. They welcomed it. For they remembered the deep heart, and they knew what lay beneath it. A gate never meant to open. Chapter 19. The gate below the world. The spiral carved into the crust of Mandalore did not cool. It pulsed dimly at first, then, with mounting certainty, like a second heart beating beneath the skin of the world. The sigils around it were not mere symbols. They were keys, old as the stars, and carved first not by hands, but by tremors in the Force itself. The Mandalorians, though unified now in creed and armor, did not yet understand what had truly been awoken. They believed they had heard the voice of their world, but in truth they had only heard its first whisper. What they called the deep heart was merely the threshold, for beneath even that ancient presence lay something far older, a gate, hidden since before Mandalore bore a name, before Beskar was ever drawn from stone, before the galaxy's wounds were split by Jedi and Sith. It had been placed not to protect Mandalore, but to contain it. And now, With the heart stirred and the forge-blooded people walking again in unity, the locks had begun to tremble. At first, the signs were subtle. The forges grew louder without fuel. The mist rising from the living waters began to glow a faint crimson at dusk. Beskar armor, untouched by war or weather, began to hum in low, dissonant tones when held too near the spiral mark. Children saw visions in their sleep, not dreams of ancestors, but memories of things that had not yet come. The armorer listened and said nothing. Bo-Katan watched the stars as if waiting for them to fall. And Grogu, old in spirit though small in form, sat at the edge of the waters and wept without sound. He could feel the shape of the gate. He could sense the scream coiled within it. It was not merely a door between worlds. It was a prison, built to hold something no creed could bind. The Mandalorians called it the gate below the world, but the Tongvan scripts lost to wind and time called it something else. Shedavar, the lightless threshold, a place forged in the first war between light and dark, before sabers, before temples, before even the Rakata tore fire from the stars. According to these forgotten myths, Mandalore had once been a wound, a scar left behind after something ancient had been buried alive. Not a creature, not a god, but a consciousness, a hunger. Something drawn from the edge of the Force itself, locked beneath the planet's surface by warriors who gave their bodies to the stone to keep it sealed. The Beskar, the living waters, the deep fire, all of it was not a blessing. It was a binding. The planet's gifts were chains, and now the unity of the Mandalorians, their rebirth, their song had acted like a key. The first true sign came without warning. A tremor not felt through the ground, but through the mind. Mandalorians across the surface collapsed in unison, seized by visions of a spiral descending into black. Their helmets grew hot. Their hearts raced as one. When they awoke, they could not speak, not from fear, but from awe. In that moment, the gate had begun to open, not physically, but spiritually. The galaxy tilted, ever so slightly, and those with ears attuned to the old frequencies in chants, in hiding, cults in shadow, Sith remnants buried deep felt the shift and turned their gaze toward Mandalore. Among them was one who had waited, not a Sith, not a Jedi, something else. She had no name that echoed in the galaxy's records, for she lived between them, a creature of forgotten bloodlines and broken prophecies. Once a hand of a long-dead emperor, now reborn in the flesh of dark sorcery, she had watched the fall of Mandalore with delight, but its rise, its sacred, unified rise, concerned her. Not because it threatened her power, but because it threatened the balance of her design. She had long believed the gate would remain sealed forever, but now, with the ancient symbol glowing anew, with the darksaber shattered and reforged in spirit, she knew the time had come, and with her came others, disciples, not of war, but of silence. They called themselves the Ash Tongues. Once Jedi, once Sith, now neither. Each had touched the deep heart in meditation and emerged, changed. Scarred, hallowed, they did not serve the Force, they served what lay beneath it. The gate's influence began to ripple outward. Storms formed where skies had once been clear. The living waters rose in temperature by degrees, then refused to cool. Those who bathed in them emerged, speaking languages never taught, and the forges began to burn without metal, producing shapes uncommanded by any smith. Mandalorians forged weapons in trance blades, with no edges, armor that hummed with living breath. The spiral mark became a pilgrimage site, but the armorer forbade entry. Not until the 13th moon, she whispered, recalling a prophecy. scrawled in ancient script, when the moons of Mandalore align, and the breath of the gate escapes the forge, the last mask shall fall, and the first face shall return. No one knew what it meant, but Grogu, whose eyes had seen Jedi temples and Mandalorian fire alike, began to speak. Not often, not clearly, but in fragments. Beneath, he said, burning, watching, the gate knows. As the 13th moon rose, strange lights danced. Across Mandalore's sky neither aurora nor weapon fire, but something deeper. The spiral glowed white-hot, and in the heart of the chasm, the mist rose again, this time cold, silver, and full of shapes. The Mandalorians gathered, not with weapons, but with bare hands. They stood ready, not for war, but for revelation. The deep heart beat once, then twice, then silence. A silence so deep it swallowed thought, and then a sound, not a voice. A knock, one slow, echoing knock against the other side of the gate, as if something knows someone had heard them calling. Chapter 20. The mask of the first face. The sound was ancient. It was not made by hand, nor claw, nor machine, but by intention, as if the force itself had bent inward and produced a single, dreadful echo from behind the veil of the world. That knock, low and steady, was not a call for war. It was an invitation, a signal that the lock was turning not from the outside, but from within. Across Mandalore, the winds changed direction. Ashes long buried beneath glass and stone were swept into the air. The waters of the deep stilled. Fires that once danced joyously along the forge now stood motionless, as if awaiting command. And the spiral mark, once dim and mysterious, now roared with white heat. Mandalorians by the hundreds gathered at the edge of the chasm, armor silent, weapons sheathed. None spoke, none breathed too deeply. They knew what this moment was. Not a beginning, not an end. A return. The armorer approached the edge last, her blackened helm reflecting a light not from this world. In her hand she held no weapon but a mask, smooth, silver, unmarked. It was not made of Beskar. It was made of something older, something that remembered everything. Bo-Katan knelt beside her. Grogu stood between them, his eyes aglow with forces neither light nor dark. From the depths of the chasm came a second knock, this one heavier, slower, as if the thing behind the gate were awakening. Then the spiral mark split open, not cracked, not shattered, but peeled, like the skin of a fruit too ripe to hold its truth. A column of dark light surged upward, not bright, not blinding, but dense, a light that seemed to press inward on the mind. Around it rose voices, countless, overlapping, indistinct. They were not speaking in any known tongue, yet every man understood the meaning. The face returns. The creed is memory. The chains have names. The gate was no longer a threshold. It had become a mouth. And the planet, ancient and armored in its silence, had begun to speak. The silver mask in the armorer's hands began to vibrate. Runes, not etched by tool, but by presence, appeared on its surface, runes in the shape of stars, flames, and bones. It was the mask of the first face, a relic lost since the time of the Tong. Legend had whispered that the first to ever kneel before Mandalore, the great, wore no face of their own. They had cast aside their birth, their name, their blood, and donned a mask carved not by smiths, but by fire and vision. That mask was said to hold the memory of all wars, all oaths, all betrayals. It had disappeared long ago, stolen in the night by a cursed warrior whose name had been erased from all record. And now it had returned, not in triumph, but in warning. As The chasm deepened, its walls began to shift, not crumble, shift, as though they were not made of stone at all, but of armor ancient, planetary, worn by a being slumbering beneath the world. The Beskar in every Mandalorian's armor hummed in resonance. Helmets glowed with flickers of long-dead battles. Visions flooded their minds wars before the Jedi flames that never died. Children training with spears beneath a sunless sky. Grogu raised one hand, trembling, and pointed downward. There, in the black light, a shape was rising. Not a monster, not a god. A warrior, tall, motionless, featureless. It was not made of flesh, but of echo, a being born from the stored memory of all Mandalorian war. The ash tongues, now circled in silence on the canyon rim, fell to their knees. One of them began to chant in the old tongue, words that had not been spoken aloud since before. Hyperspace had a name, Shadavar, Matra Carvel. The words meant, from the gate comes not darkness, but memory. We are what we buried then. The shape in the chasm lifted its hand, and the mask of the first face flew from the armorer's grasp, hovered in the air, and descended toward the figure. As it touched the void-like shape, it did not settle upon a face. It became the face. And in that moment, the entire world of Mandalore shuddered, not with fear, but with recognition. The planet remembered this being. It was not a stranger. It was Mandalore, not a title, not a warrior, but the soul of the creed itself, returning in form, drawn upward by unity and forged in prophecy. This was not a leader to be followed. It was the final judge of what it meant to be Mandalore. And its gaze, though it had no eyes, fell upon each of them. Bo-Katan stepped forward, defiant yet reverent. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a terrible hope. "What are you?" she asked, and the shape replied not in words, but in memory. All of them saw it. The first war, the ancient betrayal, the pact made beneath stars older than this galaxy. They saw the forging of Beskar, not as metal, but as promise. They saw the fall of the Tong, the rise of the Neo-Crusaders. The cries of children turned warriors. They saw the Darksaber taken, broken, reforged, and lost again. They saw the Mandalorian spirit carried in exile across generations. And they saw the gate sealed, not to keep something out, but to keep the truth in, that they were never meant to conquer the galaxy. They were meant to remind it of strength, of survival, of silence beneath the stars, and of the price that must be paid for unity. The shape raised its hand again, and in its palm burned a flame that bore no heat, no color, only gravity. The flame drifted upward, toward the gathered clans, and with it came one final word, whispered, not in voice, but into the hearts of all Mandalorians. Choose. Then the light fell inward. The gate cracked open, and from the depths of Mandalore, something stepped forward. Not a warrior, not a god, but a child in silver armor, wearing the mask of the first face. Chapter 21. The creed that remembers there was no sound. Not silence, but the kind of stillness that existed before time, when the stars had yet to ignite, when the force itself had not yet taken breath. That was the air that surrounded the child, now standing where the gate had split open. No one moved. No one spoke. The young one, clad in silver Beskar, with limbs still small and uncertain, wore upon his head the mask of the first face. He had no name, not yet, no clan, no song, no title, but in him burned the memory of every war, every forge, every child taken beneath the sky of Mandalore and made into more than flesh. And when he raised his hand not in power, but in invitation, the people did not kneel. They stepped forward, one by one, not in unison, but in rhythm, as if the bones of the planet beneath them remembered the steps of this dance, this return, this final reckoning. The armorer stood still, her gaze fixed not on the mask, nor on the gate, but on the child's posture, upright, open, unwilling to command, yet unable to be denied. Grogu stood beside him now, silent as stone, ears twitching, toward an unseen horizon. Behind them, Bo-Katan removed her helmet, not in defiance, but in farewell. The era of choosing between face and mask, between past and present, had ended. The creed no longer demanded separation. It had become remembrance. In the sky above, the storms parted, not with violence, but as if some ancient agreement had been fulfilled. Stars, long dimmed by war and smoke, blinked awake once more, and somewhere beyond those stars, Mandalore the Great stirred not in life, but in legend. His spirit, ever circling the heart of Mandalore, paused, not to return, but to watch. The planet itself shifted, not violently, but as though it had exhaled for the first time in 1,000 years. Canyons sealed, black glass turned soft with green growth, and in the valley of the last kin, bones long buried stood upright, then crumbled into dust, their burden finally lifted. The warriors of the Watch lowered their rifles. The survivors of the Ash Tongues unbound their faces. Even Death watched those ancient rebels of fire, and fewer let their banners fall gently to the soil. For they had seen it too. The child did not wield power. He reflected it. Not with might, not with command, but with stillness. And the mask, that cursed artifact of 1,000 betrayals, wept beneath its polished surface, not with tears, but with memory. It saw them. All Jaster, Miriel, Satine Cries, Tari Vizsla, Pre Vizsla, Gar Saxon, Paz Vizsla, and Din Djarin. It saw the Darksaber fall and rise again and fall once more. It saw the Mandalorian heart shattered across the stars and reassembled piece by piece in exile and sorrow and flame. And it knew this was not victory, this was not return. This was what the creed had always meant, that Mandalore is not land, nor weapon, nor blood. It is memory, shared, carried, forged in loss, and bound in silence. As dawn came not over the planet, but from within it a new city began to rise around the gate, not of towers or palaces, but of circles, of forges, of homes built with space between them for silence. A temple was carved into the mountain where the spiral mark once lay, not to worship, but to remember, and within it sat no throne, only the armor of the fallen, melted into a single block, upon which the creed would be recited. This is the way, yes, but also we were the flame, we are the ash, we remember so we do not vanish. The clans returned, not in conquest, but in kinship. Children trained again in the spear, the blaster, the code, but this time they were told the truth. Not just the triumphs, but the betrayals. Not just the songs, but the screams. The blood of Jedi and Sith, of Republic and Empire, had touched their hands, but now they would be still. For stillness is what follows the storm. And Mandalore, for the first time in millennia, had no enemy to chase, no war to wage, only itself to remember. In the hidden corners of the galaxy, rumors spread that Mandalore had awakened, that a boy in silver had walked from a wound in the world and spoke no words, yet changed all things. Some feared him, some denied him, but all knew the truth when they heard it. The Mandalorians had returned, not as a people of wrath, but as a people of weight, of presence. They would no longer be pulled by outside wars, for their war had ended. They had survived their own forgetting, and in doing so had become unmovable. Din Djarin never returned. His armor was sealed beneath the new temple, resting beneath a tree that had not grown on Mandalore in over 1,000 years. Grogu remained for a time, teaching not with language, but with gesture. And when he left walking into the dune sea, and vanishing like smoke, none followed, for his lesson had been given. The child remained, grew, spoke, and the first words he ever uttered. Years later, standing before a circle of foundlings, were not a command, not a prophecy, but a question. What do you remember? And that became the new creed. Not obedience, not power, but memory. For they had worn many masks, spoken many names, followed many banners, and in the end, it was not Beskar that had saved them. It was not fire. It was not blood. It was the refusal to forget. It was the armor of remembrance. It was the way. And so the final mask was placed, not on a warrior, but on time itself. The Mandalorians, once shattered, now whole not by victory, but by memory returned not to conquer the stars, but to endure them.